Hey there, Robert John Hadfield here again from Audiomover. Going to talk about some classic vinyl. This one goes under the category of, hey, I've got an idea how we can make some money. Because this was just really a picture disc that was kind of a best of album, kind of, I don't know, it was just cool to get because it was a picture disc. And these were kind of they were a novelty. Back when vinyl was big, back in the 80s, a lot of bands would put out picture discs, and basically we called it that because it was the record and it had a picture on it. And there's a picture on the other side too, and I'll show you all this stuff in a minute, but a lot of people did these. It was very common. And they could charge you a few extra bucks for it, and it was just kind of neat to have something like this. And once again, it was just kind of a novelty. And this one, I was a really big Judas Priest fan. And so I saw this and I thought, wow, that'd be really cool to have. And so I picked it up, and it was kind of an interesting thing because the album, you can see a long time ago, it looks like I tried to scratch the price tag off so you could see the song list. But anyway, you can see if you're a Judas Priest fan, you'll see from the song list that there's really no rhyme or reason to it. It's just a bunch of random songs from different albums. Maybe some of their more popular stuff. I guess that's the rhyme or reason to it. But it's interesting because it says, it has the Judas Priest and the classic logo, and then it says features these great vinyl and concert hits. So there's nothing on here. It implies, or at least I at the time had the impression that there was some live stuff on here, but there's not. So the point is, these were kind of hits off of the record, but some of these were actually just really popular concert songs. Anyway, that's kind of what they were alluding to there. And the song list, the track list though, it's a lot of classic Priest stuff. And so you can't knock the stuff they put on here because there's a lot of, if you're into Judas Priest, these are some of their really cool songs. But man, they had so much great stuff. I loved Judas Priest. I thought they were just, they were an amazing band, especially if you liked heavy metal back in the 80s. These guys were just great. And so the first one on side A, and this is, by the way, in case you're curious, side A, you've got Another Thing Coming, which arguably is their touchstone song, probably the biggest thing that they ever did. I guess you could say Living After Midnight, maybe off of British Steel or Breaking the Law, were pretty big, but I don't know. You've Got Another Thing Coming was kind of one of those where it's like, that's the big Priest song. And when it came out, it was big. I mean, that was, they were following up, they had put out British Steel, and this was the next album was Screaming for Vengeance. So they were following up what was, people thought was their, the greatest thing that they had done. And then they put out Screaming for Vengeance, which in my opinion was better than British Steel. I'll probably get a lot of hate for that, but I loved Screaming for Vengeance. Like, that to me was the best thing Judas Priest ever did. So You've Got Another Thing Coming, big hit. Green Man Alishi, that was off of an album that had two different names. It was Killing Machine and it was Hellbent for Leather, depending on which country you were in. But I don't know how many people, maybe everybody realizes this, but Green Man Alishi, the first time I ever heard that song was on their live album Unleashed for the East, and I loved it. It was such a cool tune. But that song, Green Man Alishi, is not a Judas Priest song. It's actually originally a Fleetwood Mac song written by Peter Green in Fleetwood Mac. But this version, the Judas Priest, it is so cool. I love what they did with that song. It's amazing. And it's kind of, when you listen to it that way, it fits in with what they do as Judas Priest. It was a great song. Metal Gods, that was off of the album I just mentioned a minute ago, British Steel. And that song has kind of become important for Judas Priest because that's why a lot of people now, refer to Rob Halford as the Metal God. They originally had this song called Metal Gods, and somehow that translated into him being the metal god. Free Will Burnin', I love that song. It's so cool. And that one came off of the album, actually the album that this picture was taken right around the time the album Defenders of the Faith came out. And Defenders of the Faith, Anyway, that song was on Defenders of the Faith. Defenders of the Faith came out right after Screaming for Vengeance. That was the next album. And it was also an amazing record. But Free Will Burnin' came off of that. And like I said, this picture that you're looking at here was taken... If you look at the publicity photos and the different things they took at that time around the Defenders of the Faith album, this was, you had Glenn in the red leather pants, and this was the look that they had in those publicity shots. So this picture would have been taken around that time. And then, of course, the song Hell Bent for Leather, which was taken from that same album I mentioned a minute ago, which was Killing Machine or Hell Bent for Leather. Now, Hell Bent for Leather has become a really, really important song for Judas Priest, because if you go see him in concert, this is the song where he drives the Harley out onto the stage. And if you haven't read Rob Halford's book or listened to it, I've listened to it on Audible, and he actually narrates it, so it's really cool. He does a great job with it. He talks about a crazy experience once taking the motorcycle out on stage. You have to read it, where he hits his head, and it's it's crazy. It's very interesting. Anyway, that's what that song has become kind of notorious, because it's where Rob Halford pulls the Harley out onto the stage. Next song, Love Bites. Oh my gosh, I used to love this song so much. This was on Defenders of the Faith tour. This is the one that boom starts off with those pounding, those low bass notes. It's so cool. Hot Rockin' and Desert Plains, the next two songs, were really kind of, especially Hot Rockin's, are really catchy too. Wanna go, Hot Rockin'. Both of these came off of an album called Point of Entry. And Point of Entry had two different album covers. And anyway, there was some really cool stuff on that record. So anyway, those were both Point of Entry songs. And Living After Midnight, of course, and Breaking the Law, like I mentioned a minute ago, those came off of British Steel. And British Steel, for a lot of people, was the pinnacle for Judas Priest. I mean, it really made the band. I mean, that was where they were on the map once that album came out. So those both are from that. So let's take it out so you can see it a little more clearly. Move this over to the side. So that right there is what the picture disc looks like, and it's pretty neat. I mean, I don't know the technology behind how they did this stuff, but it has this. The picture is just, clear as can be. It looks kind of amazing how they put this together. And so, these were just novelties. It was kind of a fun thing to have. But what was so interesting is what they picked to put on the flip side of this record. Because of all the things they could have picked, we just went through this track list. We talked about all these different things, what they would have put on the other side. And take a look what they put over here. They put the album cover for Screaming for Vengeance. And this is the Hellion, is what they call this. And there's this little like poem or some writing on the back of the album, or the insert or something that talked about the Hellion. It says something like rising through darkness where hell hath no mercy. It's something like that, kind of a thing, just describing what this character is supposed to be. Anyway, they picked the picture off of Screaming for Vengeance and put it on here. Screaming for Vengeance was such a great album. What kills me, you look at the songs that they put on this little picture disc. They only had one song from Screaming for Vengeance, and I loved probably almost all of my favorite Judas Priest songs are on this record, on Screaming for Vengeance. I love everything on there, and I love everything on there a lot. Starting with Electric Eye. I mean, you just go down the list. And the song Screaming for Vengeance is so great, man. Oh my gosh. I was so into these guys. They were so absolutely fantastic. But that was the picture they used, and I loved these, for a couple of albums there. For this one and then Defenders of the Faith, they created these really cool looking characters on the album covers. And then this is this one, like some sort of a hawk or an eagle, whatever it was, but kind of neat. But they, this look that these guys had, it's interesting when you watch the trajectory of their look. When you look at those early albums, the really early stuff, when they recorded Rock-a-Rolla, Sad Wings of Destiny. Look on this back of Sad Wings of Destiny, the clothes that they wore were nothing like this. And, Sad Wings had a couple of really great songs on there. And The Ripper, which is one of my all-time favorite Judas Priest songs, is on there. And, you know, I originally was introduced to that on the Unleashed in the East album. And then I went back, you know, I was a young guy, like most people that watch my stuff, you know, we were all roughly in that age range. And, you know, and I would hear these songs on the live album, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. And then you go back and listen to it, and it sounds different, and it's slower. And then after a while, you're like, I think I like the album version better. Wait, I'm not sure. And anyway. But, you know, they had, this is there. And Rob Halford always had, you know, that really short hair, which was such an interesting thing, especially during that period. Now, of course, you can see why. He was, you know, he was really thin on top, didn't have a lot of hair. And, you know, it's so interesting. If you haven't read his book, Rob Halford's book, it's worth reading. It tells you, it doesn't go into as much history of the band as I would like, but man, it tells you a little bit about some of the history of the records and what happened behind them. But most of the book, a lot of it is about Rob Halford growing up in this world of heavy metal and being homosexual. And it was well, like I said, it's actually a really excellent book. And I remember I was in a recording studio, because you remember Rob Halford, and it was such a big deal for him, because you just don't, at the time, you know, being in that world of heavy metal, I guess to him, really, it seemed so weird, like it didn't fit in with all the, you know, you had all these different bands, and it was all about womanizing and sleeping. You know, look at Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley and Stephen Pearcy and all these other people that were rock stars. It was about how many women you can sleep with, and they you know, it was like a trophy for them. And then he's in the middle of that, you know, that world, and he's obviously not going to do that. And so, you know, that's what his whole book is, just kind of his dealing with that in his life and what he did. It was so interesting, because when he came out on an MTV interview, and he talks a little bit about that in his book too. What was so funny is, I remember I was in a recording studio, and I was a huge Judas Priest fan, and we were in a recording studio, and somebody came in and said, hey, Rob Halford just did an interview on MTV, and he said that he's gay. And it was hilarious, because the guy that was producing our band looked over and he goes, did somebody think he wasn't? And I go, and then all of us kind of look at the clothes that he started wearing earlier in the career, and we start going, you know what? Now that you mention it, but it was so funny, because I think for most of us we go, is that supposed to, what does that mean? Am I supposed to do something now? I mean, did the music start, does that make a difference? Is that supposed to make a difference to us? What, am I missing something? Anyway, it turned out that I don't know if it was a thing for anybody, but Rob Halford was worried about it through his entire career. You know, the whole thing of covering this up, and I don't know that any of us cared, you know, once he started sharing with the world. Anyway, but these guys, this was kind of the classic Judas Priest lineup here, this picture. You had Ian Hill, who is the bassist, and he's always been, and he's still the bassist. You know, and he's just this dude that stands in the background. I don't think he takes one step through the entire show. Kind of leans over and plays his bass, and then that's it. Just solid player. KK Downing, who's also a really interesting dude, real smart guy, and he's an excellent guitar player. Of course, Rob Halford there in the middle. You know, and they also, getting back to what I was saying, you know, Rob Halford started experimenting with what was in essence kind of S&M clothing. You know, he'd have the whip and the other things, and then all of them started wearing that kind of stuff, the chains and the studs and the leather, and it just kind of became their look. So there's Rob Halford with all the studs and the leather, and then of course you get over here to Glenn Tipton, and poor Glenn, he has I think it's Parkinson's, and so he can't perform anymore. And I saw a video not long ago where they kind of took him out on stage and tried to play a little bit, and I don't know how long ago that was, but you know, I've had a relative that went through Parkinson's, and it's ugly. It's an ugly, ugly thing, and so, you know, God bless him for. These two guys that play the guitar, I don't think they liked each other very much, but, you know, the two of them made some just crazy, amazing music. And then Dave Holland here on the end, you know, he ended up being a real creep. You know, ended up in jail, I think, for a while. But it's interesting, this guy had played with he played in a group with Glenn Hughes. But the thing that surprised me the most, before he joined Judas Priest, not long before he joined, he'd played in a band called I think they called it the Blue Jays. And what was so interesting about it is, you know who was in it? John Lodge and Justin Hayward from Moody Blues. So it was not heavy metal music, okay? So he was, and if you ever watched him in the concerts, he looked, in my opinion, Dave Holland looked a little bit out of place. You know, as far as a metal drummer goes, the way he performed, he was solid, I think. You know, he seemed to be, but he didn't have, during the 80s when metal was kind of the way it was, he didn't seem to fit that, whatever that was. He just kind of was an oddball in the group here. Anyway, but this is the classic Judas Priest lineup. A lot of the great stuff that you remember from British Steel through Defenders. I don't know if he stuck or if he was on Turbo. I don't think Holland was on Turbo. Anyway, but this was really the classic lineup that a lot of us are familiar with, and when they were really, really at their peak. And I saw them in concert on the Defenders of the Faith tour. And I'll be honest with you, they were I'm not a big concert guy, as I've talked about before, but they were great. Rob Halford was one of the most, in a weird way, one of the most charismatic frontmen that I'd ever seen. He doesn't jump around, he doesn't go crazy, he just has this thing about him. And he just has this command, and it's, I guess the best way I could come up with it when I first saw it was that he just seemed kind of classy. It felt stable and solid, and he felt like he was in charge. And it was kind of cool that way. So I love Rob Halford. I think he was amazing. And his voice was, how do you beat him? He was had this crazy voice. And still, if you watch his stuff today, even he's a really older guy. And he still sounds good. A lot of singers just can't hack it. He just had this natural thing, and he just really, really had it together. So he was spectacular. And he had some interesting stuff that he went off and did solo. I've listened to some of it, and some of it was kind of cool. I don't know. I like I said, I'm a fan of his. I like what he's done, and I kind of dig him as a person. He's an interesting character. So if you like these videos, please like and subscribe to this channel. And if you want to support what we do here, what you do is go to Audiomover.com and start an order. Go there, and if you have old audio and videotapes, you send them into Audiomover.com, and or if you know people that have them, go to Audiomover.com, and that's where we convert your old audio and videotapes to digital. Anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.